St. Patrick's Day. That one magical day of the year where everybody becomes just a little bit Irish. Especially if you're an American. But why exactly is that? Why does the United States even celebrate St. Patrick's Day? Well, it's time to find out. So grab a pint, pull up a chair, and let's get into it, shall we? Whilst there was a solemn holy feast day for St. Patrick observed in Ireland and Europe dating back to the 10th century, the first recorded St. Patrick's Day celebrations and parade, however, were not held in Ireland or even in Europe. No, it was held on a completely different continent, North America, specifically in St. Augustine in the Spanish colony of Florida in 1601. It was organised by an Irish immigrant and priest, Richard Arthur, known to his Spanish parishioners as Padre Ricardo Arthur, and it is assumed Richard had organised it as a celebration of his Catholic faith and Irish identity. So while the first St. Patrick's Day celebrations in North America may not have taken place in the original 13 American colonies, the seeds of this tradition had already been planted on the continent and would soon spread directly or indirectly to the neighbouring American colonies. The first St. Patrick's Day celebrations in the 13 colonies, however, can be traced back as far as 1737 and were organised by the Charitable Irish Society of Boston. These were then followed up by the first St. Patrick's Day parade in the colonies occurring some years later in 1762 in New York. Further St. Patrick's Day observances in the colonies would occur in Philadelphia in 1771, which were organised by the Irish American Fraternal Society, the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. The organisation was founded in Philadelphia by Irish-born Pennsylvanian representative Thomas Fitzsimmons, along with General Stephen Moylan, a Cork-born Irish cavalry commander in the Continental Army and aide to George Washington. These St. Patrick's Day events were becoming increasingly important in the colonies, as many colonists were either Irish born or of Irish descent, with the Irish colonial population being second in number only to the English colonists. In fact, it is estimated that 250,000 Irish immigrants arrived in the American colonies between 1717 and 1775. By 1790, that number would be well over 400,000. Meaning at this time 10% of the United States were either Irish born or of Irish descent. So later on during the American Revolutionary War, it made complete sense that George Washington would draw on this massive pool of Irish Americans to form nearly half of the Continental Army and state militias. The Irish would eagerly enlist to the American cause, as they also desired Ireland's very own independence from Britain.
Irishmen and the descendants have always played a significant role in America's history. Some of our most fiery patriots, the ones who inspired the colonies onto independence, were of Irish blood.
Additionally, 8 men of Irish birth or descent would later become signatories of the American Declaration of Independence, and General Washington even allowed his battle-weary army one day of respite on St. Patrick's Day, 1780, as an act of solidarity with the Irish fight for independence. This event would later become known as the St. Patrick's Day Encampment, and was a huge boost to the morale of the Irish-born and Irish-American soldiers in his ranks. Irish recruits actually played such a pivotal role in the conflict that after the war, Lord Mountjoy would lament in the British Parliament that "we have lost America through the Irish." So the early Irish colonists and the contributions of Irish Americans during the Revolutionary War helped begin to cement the unique links and contributions of Ireland to the culture and heritage of the young burgeoning United States. Washington himself would later say,
"When our friendless standards were first unfurled, who were the strangers who first mustered around our staff? And when it reeled in the light, who more brilliantly sustained it than Aaron's generous sons?"
In the decades following the United States' independence from Britain, Irish immigrants helped in the expansion of the newly formed country as it spread westward across the continent. Irish immigrants would not only help to settle these new American territories, but also help to build the massive infrastructure needed to facilitate that settlement. Infrastructure such as roads, canals, and most infamously, railroads. The building of these new transcontinental railroads was extremely dangerous work, and it was even said that there was an Irishman buried under every tie. At the time, these extremely dangerous and hard manual labour jobs were all an undereducated Irish immigrant in America could get. But as Irish workers continued to construct these massive infrastructure projects, they eventually settled in many of these new areas and continued to spread Irish culture and traditions across the United States, further instilling the St. Patrick's Day celebrations to the Irish Americans and other Americans alike. Irish immigration to the United States would continue steadily throughout the early 19th century, with around 1 million new immigrants arriving between 1820 to 1845. From 1846 to 1851, however, there would be an enormous spike in the numbers of Irish immigrants arriving in the US, precipitated by the Great Famine occurring back in Ireland. The Great Irish Famine was a disastrous era in Irish history, brought on by the failure of the potato crop, a staple of the early 19th century Irish diet, which was afflicted by a microorganism that caused a crop disease known as late blight, and this blight would soon wipe out most of the country's food supply in short order. The famine resulted in the deaths of over 1 million people, with another 1 million having to leave the country to survive. The population of Ireland fell by almost 25% during this period, and most of the immigrants fleeing the country would come to the United States aboard transports known as coffin ships, where many on board would not survive the transatlantic crossing to America. Those who did survive the journey, however, would make cities such as New York, Boston and Philadelphia their new homes. The ripple effect of the famine would continue on for decades, with subsequent waves of Irish people arriving in the US. These new immigrants would either integrate into existing Irish American communities like Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, or start new ones of their very own. And it was during this period that the United States was experiencing its own calamity, finding itself engaged in the middle of a civil war against the Confederacy, a collection of states that desired to break away from the Union. However, the war initially did not go well for the Union, led by Abraham Lincoln, with massive casualties in battles such as Bull Run, Shiloh and Antietam. The Union would have to find a way to replace this heavy loss of life, and so implemented the Conscription Act of 1863. This saw large numbers of men drafted into the Union Army, and as most Irish immigrants tended to arrive and settle in the northern states, many of these new draftees would be the newly arrived, fresh off the boat Irish immigrants. Many of these Irish recruits would form their own units, such as the Irish Brigade. This unit and other Irish combat units would distinguish themselves throughout the war with their courage, fighting spirit and support for the Union causes of freedom and liberty. Over 150,000 Irishmen would fight as part of the Union Army, under which 7 generals were either Irish born or of Irish descent, including the future US President Ulysses S. Grant. The Irish, like many immigrant groups to the United States, weren't always welcomed with open arms by the regular US population, and were often treated as second-class citizens. However, the service of so many Irish soldiers in the Union Army that fought to preserve and uphold American ideals did much to change this perspective of Irish men and women in America. It even led many non-Irish Americans to begin appreciating and celebrating Irish customs and traditions as a show of respect and solidarity to their new countrymen. Over time, Irish people would continue to assimilate into the American way of life, while still continuing to influence it in many ways. And soon, St. Patrick's Day would begin to be celebrated by not just Irish Americans, but Americans in general, and would continue to become a bigger and bigger part of American culture. As the process of Irish assimilation continued, many Irish immigrants began to climb the social ladder, moving from menial manual labour jobs to jobs in the fire and police departments. By 1855, approximately 40% of New York police officers were Irish, which gave rise to the stereotypical Irish police officer archetype in movies, books and TV shows. Important jobs such as these further ingrained the Irish into American society, with making the normalisation of Irish traditions and celebrations more mainstream and palatable to everyday non-Irish Americans of all ethnicities and backgrounds. The Irish would begin to become heavily involved in US politics, becoming mayors in cities like Chicago, Baltimore, Pittsburgh and Houston. The influence of the Irish lobby would grow to become a major political force in the US by the 20th century as a result. While there had been American presidents of partly Irish descent in the past, such as Andrew Jackson, Ulysses S. Grant and Chester A. Arthur, it wasn't until the election of the 35th US President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1961 that an Irish Catholic had held the office. As you can imagine, this was a major milestone for the Irish in America and further cemented the Irish community's place in the country. Many subsequent presidents after Kennedy would then go on to espouse their Irish heritage, such as Presidents Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama. The contribution of Irish Americans to the American culture is far-ranging and varied. Many Irish American contributions can be felt in literature with authors Edgar Allan Poe and George R.R. Martin, in sports with quarterback Tom Brady, in music with Nirvana's Kurt Cobain, in manufacturing with industrialist Henry Ford, In entertainment with animation pioneer Walt Disney, in space with astronaut legend Neil Armstrong, in Wild West folklore with outlaw Billy the Kid, and in the US military with John Barry, one of the founding fathers of the US Navy, and US Army legend Audie Murphy. Halloween too was also in great part brought to America by Irish immigrants, and it is now a major American holiday along with St. Patrick's Day. Today, Ireland and the United States relationship is still extremely strong due to the extensive cultural ties and shared values.
I'm from Chicago. That's where I was born. And you know what we do on St. Patrick's Day? We dye the river green. People are very serious about Ireland and the United States. Don't mess with it. Don't make it look bad.
The two countries also enjoy strong economic ties with many US multinationals such as Google, Apple, Facebook, and Intel, all having their European or international headquarters located in Ireland. Irish firms similarly have a strong economic presence in the US, providing roughly over 80,000 jobs to American workers. In March, the US celebrates Irish American Heritage Month to honour the many Americans of Irish descent who helped to shape American history and who also contributed to modern American society and culture. The Irish Taoiseach also visits Washington DC to meet with the US President for the Shamrock ceremony, in which the US President is gifted a Waterford crystal bowl of shamrock in the White House. A side note, the White House itself was actually designed by an Irish architect, James Hoban, and the fountain in the White House is also now dyed green to mark the occasion. While St. Patrick's Day may have begun as a solemn religious tradition in Ireland and throughout Europe, once it spread to North America, it began to slowly change there, from a solemn religious observance to more of a celebration of Irish heritage for the homesick Irish diaspora in the United States. And through the Irish cultural assimilation and normalisation into American culture and society, it eventually evolved to also become an American celebration too, with its own uniquely American variations and customs. Ireland itself, however, would continue on with its own more solemn religious type traditions for some time. But slowly, the Americanized version of St. Patrick's Day traditions began to cross the Atlantic, and this time they would influence the modern observance of St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. So St. Patrick's Day really has become in many ways almost a hybridized version of the holiday in modern times, and is one that is shared between Ireland and the United States and by the Irish diaspora worldwide. So I hope this video shed some light on why the United States celebrates St. Patrick's Day, and to finish, I'd like to wish our American cousins across the pond a very happy St. Patrick's Day from Ireland. Now let's raise a point to our shared history and to the main man himself, St. Patrick. Thanks for watching, and if you found this topic as intriguing as I did, don't forget to drop a like and remember to subscribe if you want to see more intriguing content like this in the future.